Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. And welcome once again to Felonious Females, the series that brings to light the lives of convict women whose stories have too often been overlooked. This episode is presented by Jan Richards, AM, who has been deeply engaged in family and local history research since the early 1980s, with a particular focus on the Newcastle region, where her own ancestors settled in the 1820s. Jan also contributed to the project that documented more than 1,600 female convicts in the Newcastle Family History Society's publication, They Sent Me North, Female Convicts in the Hunter. Today, we trace the journey of Jan's ancestor, Hannah Williams, a woman whose fate was sealed by a single decision in London, setting her on a course across the seas into the convict system and ultimately into the story of early Newcastle.
The journey of my ancestor Anne, known as Hannah Williams, to the colony of New South Wales was predestined when she stole a watch and 2 seals valued at 32 shillings from Sarah Howells at the Marquis Cornwallis public house in Marchmont Street, London, on the 25th of October, 1828. Hannah, then aged 18, admitted to the magistrate that she had stolen from Sarah, formerly a fellow servant, because she did not like to part with her clothes on account of going to service again. This attachment to her apparel would lead her to court in the future, but on that occasion as the victim, not the accused. Hannah was tried and convicted of theft, simple grand larceny, at the Old Bailey on the 4th of December 1828 and transported for 7 years. A native of London, at the time of her conviction she was resident in the parish of Bloomsbury St George. From the convict indents we know that she was 5 foot 4 inches, with a ruddy complexion, light brown hair, hazel eyes and irregular teeth. Her trade was recorded as all work and laundress. She was held in Newgate Prison awaiting transportation aboard the Sovereign, a ship of 398 tons under the command of William McKellar, which sailed from the Downs, a stretch of sheltered water off Deal in Kent. The first draft of female prisoners was brought on board on the 21st of April 1829, with the full complement of 119 convicts, 23 children and 10 passengers by the time of sailing on the 23rd of April 1829. From the journal of Surgeon Superintendent George Fairfowl, we have a picture of life on board the Sovereign during the voyage to New South Wales. In his book, The Convict Ships, Charles Bateson describes Fairfowl as one of the best known of the surgeon superintendents, who made at least 7 voyages to Australia. Fairfowl's description of life at sea revolves around the 2 precepts of cleanliness and godliness.
The prisoners were made to rise at 7 in the morning, and when dressed, to roll up neatly their bedding, pillows and blankets in a hard roll, and stop it with 2 small lines sewed to the back for this purpose. It was then ready to be carried up on deck when the word was given, or in wet or stormy weather, stowed away neatly in their sleeping places. After this, the prison was swept out and such parts that were wet dried up, and when all was properly done, and not before, breakfast was served. After breakfast, when the weather permitted, they were allowed upon deck, carrying with them the utensils they had used at their breakfast, and the prison received a thorough cleaning. It was then locked up until night to prevent anyone going below without appropriate leave, and it was well maintained by means of cloves burned in the water.
Once on deck, the prisoners then set about cleaning the decks and the water closets, the latter being attended to 3 times a day. The women and children were mustered on Sundays and Thursdays and inspected to see that their hair was combed and that their persons, linens and stockings were clean. Their emotional health was also important.
Cheerful and innocent amusements among themselves were encouraged, and provided the songs were not licentious, singing was permitted until 8 o'clock, except on Sundays and Thursdays, and I provided more serious employment.
On Sunday mornings, the church service comprised a short service which was read to them on the quarterdeck when weather permitted, and in the evening in the prison.
On Thursday evenings, the service was read in the prison, and they were permitted to sing the psalms and hymns which many, having been trained to it in Newgate, did with considerable taste and melody. It became a pleasant duty instead of an irksome task, and was rarely omitted, except when, from very bad weather, the prison was too damp to allow them to sit down without prejudice to their health.
Hannah came to the attention of Fairfowl days into the journey when she reported to him with headache, pains in the back and extremities, lassitude, and loss of appetite. He noted that her skin was hot, her tongue had a white covering, her bowels were bound, and she had no appearance of her menstrual cycle during the past 6 months, that is, since her arrest. This would continue for much of the journey, and her case notes extend over 3 pages, detailing instances of vomiting, faintness, nervousness, and hysteria, particularly at night. Elsewhere in his journal, he comments that, crowded together at night in the dark, the women were inclined to quarrel and play mischievous tricks on each other for want of useful employment. Perhaps this may go some way to explain Hannah's night terrors. Fairfowl finally declares her cured on the 24th of July, when he notes she has recovered her natural healthy appearance. After 102 days at sea, the Sovereign arrived in Sydney on Monday the 3rd of August 1829, and 3 days later, on the 6th of August, a government notice appeared in the Sydney Gazette advising residents that families who were in want of female servants from amongst those female prisoners who had arrived on the Sovereign should apply on or before Tuesday the 11th of August. In his final entry concerning Hannah, George Fairfowl writes, "She was landed and went immediately to service." Hannah was in fact assigned to the Reverend Lancelot Threlkeld, whose mission to the Aboriginal people had been established at Lake Macquarie. At this time, the Threlkeld family was living at Batabar, the mission house located overlooking Lake Macquarie at what we now know as Belmont. The building was substantial enough to accommodate Threlkeld's large and growing family, comprising 4 spacious rooms under the roof and 2 smaller rooms under the verandas on either side. The kitchen was separate from the main building, and huts were provided for Aboriginal helpers and his male and female convicts. In addition to Threlkeld and his wife Sarah, the household comprised 4 children from his first marriage and 2 children with Sarah, aged 4 years and 18 months respectively. Writing in his book, From Batabar to Belmont, A History of the First Century of European Settlement, 1826 to 1926, Peter Murray surmises that the constant turnover of bonded servants was the result of the remote location combined with the size of the young family. Catherine Rice, who had arrived on the Lady Rowena, a convict servant assigned to Threlkeld and subsequently charged with insolence, responded in her defence, "There is work there for 3 women." On the 15th of May 1830, Hannah was reassigned to George Brooks. Brooks was the colonial surgeon and magistrate and resided with his wife, Mary, and baby daughter, Hannah Euphemia, at the colonial surgeon's residence directly below the Newcastle jail. Writing to her father, Cleric William Cowper, in May 1832, Mary Brooks commented, "At the moment we are very well off with servants. I have less to complain of than most in the colony." Hannah was granted her ticket of leave on the 22nd of May 1832, which showed her as being in service. On the 7th of November that year, permission was granted for Hannah to marry Samuel Langham. The wedding occurred 6 days later at Christchurch, Newcastle, on the 13th of November, with the ceremony performed by the Reverend Charles Wilton. John Butler Hewson and his stepdaughter Mary Ann Hewson acted as witnesses. Samuel had been born in Birmingham in about 1808, the son of William and Sarah. A toy manufacturer, He was convicted of stealing a watch at the Smithfield Fair on the 12th of June 1824 and sentenced to 7 years at the Warwick Quarter Sessions on the 12th of July of that year. He was transported to New South Wales aboard the Royal Charlotte, arriving in Sydney on the 29th of April 1825. Records show several assignments for Samuel, including at Carter's Barracks in Sydney and to Archibald Bell at Windsor. A letter from the Colonial Secretary's Office, dated 22nd of January 1830, records his transfer from the 37 Rhodes Party to Mr. George Brooks, Colonial Surgeon and Magistrate, Newcastle. Samuel's certificate of freedom was issued on the 13th of July 1831. 9 weeks after their wedding, Hannah and Samuel's daughter, Georgiana, was born in Newcastle on the 13th of January 1833. In the Christchurch Baptism Register, Samuel's trade is recorded as shopkeeper. Governor Burke visited Newcastle in April of that year, and Samuel was one of the free inhabitants of Newcastle who signed a loyal address. On the 27th of August in that year, Hannah contributed 1 shilling to the subscription fund for survivors of the Hibernia, which had been destroyed by fire in the South Atlantic Sea en route to Australia. In 1834, Samuel applied for a town allotment, and in October the following year, 1835, was issued the deeds for a parcel of land in Watt Street, Newcastle. Their family had expanded earlier in the year with the birth of their son, James Henry, on the 4th of March. In late 1835 and early 36, Samuel and Hannah were plagued with difficulties centred around their assigned servants. Harriet Atkinson was assigned to Mrs. Langham at Newcastle on the 10th of November 1835. A little over a month later, on the 28th of December, Harriet was sentenced to 7 days in the cells for disobedience. On the 4th of January 1836, her replacement, Eliza Fitzsimons, was sentenced to 28 days in the cells and returned to government service for stealing tobacco from Langham's store and for striking Hannah with her fist. 5 weeks later, Sarah Smith was sentenced to 14 days in the cells for repeatedly calling Hannah a liar. Samuel and Hannah would appear to have been respected in Newcastle, and in February 1836, Samuel was listed as one of the auditors for the Newcastle Mechanics Institute. Despite this, they made a decision to relocate to Sydney, and by July 1836, Samuel was thanking his numerous friends on the Hunter and the public in general for their kind patronage while in Newcastle, and advising them that he had recently opened a shop on the corner of King and Clarence Streets. In addition to stocking grocery items, earthenware, glass, linen, and all kinds of slops, the Langhams offered good accommodation for persons from the Hunter being within 2 minutes' walk of the steamers. This accommodation was possibly at their abode in Pitt Street South. Hannah was again pregnant, this time with their second daughter Susan, who was born on the 25th of January 1837. She died 10 weeks later and was buried on the 15th of April. A second son, William John, was born in Sydney on the 4th of May 1838. By the 2nd of March 1841, when the census was undertaken, Hannah and Samuel were again residents of Newcastle. Samuel is listed as a merchant and artificer of King Street, and the house in which they are living is constructed of wood. The couple's third daughter, Sarah, was born on the 4th of November 1841 and christened by the Reverend Threlkeld at his new mission at Ebenezer on the 21st of November. The return to Newcastle was not without difficulty. In November, Samuel spent a fortnight at Newcastle Jail as a debtor, leaving Hannah at home with 3 small children. Then tragically, Sarah died on the 7th of September 1844, aged 2 years and 10 months, after a considerable amount of sand, soil, etc., under which she and other children were playing near the church gate, fell on her. While the jury returned a verdict of accidental death, the Maitland Mercury made comment that a certain degree of blame must be laid at the feet of the Carters for the manner in which they undermined the heap. Samuel bounced back and once again established his business in Hunter Street. He died on the 11th of February 1854, aged 46, and was buried in Christchurch Cemetery alongside his daughter Sarah. Following Samuel's death, Hannah, then aged in her mid-40s, assumed control of the business, working with her eldest son James Henry until his death in June 1866. The store was located in Hunter Street, separated by a laneway from the Yacht Club Hotel and opposite the courthouse and post office. It would subsequently be described as a small wooden building. An article in the Newcastle Morning Herald in 1897 about the former appearance of the city states that at the time of incorporation, that is, in 1859, on the harbour side of Hunter Street, Mrs. Langham's store represented the commercial world. Her store was also remembered as the only business of any consequence in the main street. Post office and trade directories of the period list her as storekeeper and her business as a fancy warehouse. From the report of an attempted burglary in March 1871, we also know that Hannah lived there alone. Hannah was active in the community, comment being made about the illuminations in her windows to welcome Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, to the town in March 1868, writing to the council on matters concerning the smell from the Market Wharf toilets, and also on the state of the road near her shop. Like their parents, Samuel and Hannah's surviving children and their spouses were active in the commercial and public life of Newcastle. Georgiana had married Henry Chaff on the 1st of January 1852, with Henry too being a storekeeper. James Henry was a ginger beer and cordial manufacturer and was active on the fledgling Newcastle Municipal Council, while William John was a publican and for some time owned the Australia Hotel, which was the site of many political meetings. On Monday the 5th of May 1879, the Newcastle Morning Herald carried an advertisement advising that J.C. Benarius would auction Mrs. Langham's stock, comprising fancy goods, haberdashery and children's clothes, braids, buttons, lace, velvet and glass, in addition to household furniture, kitchen utensils and sundries, as she was leaving Newcastle. While there is no evidence to support this, her son William and his family had left Newcastle for Sydney in about 1872, where he was the licensee of a series of public houses. In the same month that Hannah sold up in Newcastle, William was declared insolvent, and it is possible that Hannah went to Sydney to support him and his family. By 1890, Hannah had returned to Newcastle, and on the 19th of February that year, she was admitted to the Benevolent Asylum at Waratah. Her life journey ended on the 10th of August 1897, when she died at the asylum of senile decay. She was about 89 years of age. The Newcastle Morning Herald reported that she had retained all of her faculties to the end. The item also advised that Hannah and her husband had come to Newcastle in the early 40s, thus whitewashing their actual arrival 10 years earlier as convicts. Hannah was survived by her daughter Georgiana Chaff, 1833 to 1907, and son William Langham, 1838 to 1916. Hannah is buried in an unmarked grave in the Church of England Cemetery at Sandgate.
You've been listening to Felonious Females. Hannah Williams' story is just one of many that remind us how resilience, survival and reinvention shape the lives of convict women in New South Wales. Join us for more in this series as we continue to give voice to the women whose lives echo through Australia's history on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.